Garcia is a member of the UCS province. Born in Cuba, his mother, brother, and him left in 1962 as political refugees and settled in Miami when he was 9. After public high school, he went on to study architecture, earning his degree from the University of Miami in 1978. He worked as a draftsman through high school and college, and then practiced architecture on his own until 1983, when he entered the then New Orleans province. After Jesuit formation and ordination in 1993, Raphael was assigned as a pastor in 1994 at the Jesuit parish in El Paso, Texas, Sacred Heart, where he served until 2007. Those 13 years transformed his life into a greater understanding and compassion for the suffering migrant and refugee persons, and the many undocumented persons who live in the parish's borough. From 2008 to 2014, he served as pastor and superior at the Jesuit parish in Albuquerque, New Mexico. While there, he helped develop the growth of the parish's Hispanic immigrant community and was involved with others in restructuring of an interfaith immigrant justice group, New Mexico Faith Coalition, for 2014 Father Raphael served as pastor of the Jesuit parish in Kansas City, Missouri. While there, he was able to form a team, a kind of mission band, that included students from Rockhurst University to provide sacramental preparation on several Sunday afternoons to an immigrant rural community in the Lexington, Missouri area, which had not had any pastoral care for years. Children, teens, and young adults received sacraments of initiation. Feeling a desire to dedicate himself more to serving migrants and refugees, he was missioned back to Sacred Heart, El Paso, Texas, as associate pastor and as a pastoral minister to migrant and refugee persons. Raphael provides pastoral care, mainly Mass and confessions at the ICE Immigration Detention Center, as well as 2 of 3 residential detention centers for unaccompanied minors operated by Southwest Key. An important part of his ministry in El Paso is as director of the Encentro Project, an immersion program on the border that includes educational visits and presentations, direct work with asylum-seeking family, reflection, and prayers. For about 10 years, he had participated in the Jesuit migration network of Central and North America. Since July of 2020, he is once again serving as pastor of Sacred Heart Parish in El Paso, Texas. Now introducing Father Raphael.
Well, great. Hello to everyone. We're now getting used to seeing people only on the screen, so it's good to be with you electronically. I thought you would edit that bio a little bit, but anyway, you gave me the long version, so what can I say? I think, I'll start off by saying, the issue of immigration that we're going to talk about is that I myself came as a child to the United States from Cuba. It's funny because it takes a while. When you're a child, you're just living the situation and you don't reflect much on, when I'm going through this or I'm going through that. You're just actually going through it. But years later, particularly being here in El Paso, and just what's happening in the border and family separation and so on, made me realize that, I have a commonality with the people here. Maybe that's why I feel so comfortable working and serving here, because my father was not able to leave Cuba when we left, so really he stayed behind, and we had family separation in our own family. So like it was mentioned, I grew up in Miami, Florida. I went to public schools and then went to studied architecture. And my connection really, what helped me to grow in my faith and what really was a turning point in my life is I joined basically an architect that I was working for was part of what's called a Christian Life Community. I don't know if you all have Christian Life Communities. It's a Jesuit, yeah, okay, you do. So there was a Christian Life Community that existed in Cuba for many years, and then after the Castro Revolution, It was restarted in Miami, and there's houses all over, including one in New York City, actually. And so being there kind of was a turning point for me, and that's where kind of my faith life grew, and so I worked as an architect, was very involved in this Christian life community, and in that context, I felt very clearly a call to be a priest, and I was in the middle of a big project and was coming to an end, a project that I was had involved in the design and then supervising the construction, but it all worked out. I entered the Jesuits and was very happy to do that. And God works in very interesting ways, because soon after I entered the Jesuits, I went as a novice to Tijuana, Mexico. This was like within a year of entering, and the sisters there that we were working at a place called Casa de los Pobres, House of the Poor, they had this big piece of property and they wanted to do some buildings to care for the sick. So they said, "Oh, you're an architect, wonderful, we'll put you to work." And so it was really very moving for me to, enter the Jesuits and then see how God led me to do architecture in a new setting and to design. It's a small psychiatric hospital that served the poor in Tijuana, and it's anyway. So it was a great thing for me. And after studies and all the things that we the Jesuits do during formation, my first major assignment was as pastor here in 1994. And I had never been I had worked in Tijuana and I had been to Brownsville area in Texas. But being here for 13 years, like I mentioned in the bio, really changed my life to see the structural injustices and the discrimination with a lot of the Mexican immigrants, but the stories that I heard from people in the parish, and just a lot of things that they were just taken for granted, but you could see how there was this embedded discrimination, or that what John Paul II, we're going to talk about that a little bit later in Catholic social teaching, but what he calls structural injustice. That's it's built into the system, and people sometimes don't even realize it because it's just the way we do things. But how there was this discrimination, and the barrio, we're in one of the poorest neighborhoods in the United States. Actually, it's our zip code 79901. It's right next to the Mexican border to Ciudad Juarez. You probably have heard of Ciudad Juarez. It was one of the most violent cities. It still is, but a few years ago, it was one of the most violent cities in the world. Because of all that's going on with the drug trafficking and just criminal elements and all sorts of things. So anyway, so I was pastor here for 13 years, and then I moved on. And then when I came back, I never thought I would be pastor again, which I am now. But I was here doing ministry with migrants and refugees that I really liked. I came in 2016, and I don't know if you've read a little bit about this, but there was a real change, really. In 2000, it started more like in 2014 with people coming to the border to ask for asylum. There were people from Cuba, and then the Central American people started arriving a little bit before I got here. And imagine, it was really something I had not seen before. When I was here before, it was the really just a crisis of the division on the border, people being deported back to Mexico, but it was, 98% was people from Mexico back and forth. When I got here, it was a Central American situation, and people were coming to the border because it's really, when you hear the stories, it's, sometimes when you hear in the media, it's only part of the story, but when you hear the stories about people escaping, people that didn't want to particularly come to the United States. It's sort of it's a myth when you hear politicians say, well, they all want to come here, they're flooding us, and they're coming in caravans. Most of these people were happy in their homeland if they could live a peaceful, secure life. Most of them had work. People from Guatemala are particularly poor. The people that we got here from Guatemala were much more poor, because it's a poor country, and the people in the agricultural sector, because of climate change, because of droughts, and also just the way that globalization has turned the economy around. A lot of people can't survive in growing the crops that they used to grow. So they either have to migrate or they fall into criminal elements to, sell drugs or, so it's a real problem. So the reason I brought this up is that when I was here in 2016, when I first came, there people were coming to the border, families with kids, sometimes pregnant women, and the volume got up to, at some point, I think it was in 2018. At one point, it was that the ICE, the government authorities, were processing 900, 800, 700. It got up to 1,000 people a day, not a week. So these people that were processed were then let go. And it was thanks to a place here, a shelter that's been in existence for 40 years. The director's name is Ruben Garcia. He orchestrated this network of shelters that included churches and other organizations. So imagine this, one day the ICE or the Border Patrol, CBP, Customs and Border Protection, would call Ruben Garcia and say, well, today we're releasing 850 people. So he would have to connect with church number one and say, how many can you take? Well, we can take 35. How many can you take? Call some place. I'll take 50. We can take 100. And he'd have to do that every day, 7 days a week. And then there was a whole network of volunteers who would bring food, who would drive people, because the people were here for a short stay. Only, they were here, they were released, they had documents, but they were on their way to another city to continue their immigration case there. And so we had to contact their families. That was one of the things that I did at the shelter, contact the family, speak to them, of course, in Spanish and explain your relatives are here. You need to send them a bus ticket or an airline ticket. Most of them were gone between 24 and 48 hours. So it was very short stay. So that was a great part of my ministry. That has come to a halt since the MPP program started. That, as you know, Mr. Trump has cut back on a lot, but has been very anti-immigrant. So one of the things was the MPP program, which is a very deceiving name. It's a Migrant Protection Protocol, which try to figure out what that means. I have no idea what that means. Who are we protecting? And it basically means people have to wait in Mexico in very vulnerable situations. So the situation with the shelters has come to a halt. There's basically no people coming through shelters except maybe 5 or 10 a week, or very, very few. So that's all come to an end. While I was here, and also I would go to the detention centers, and with COVID that stopped. The ICE detention center and 2 places that have unaccompanied minors, 17 and under, who are not with a parent, and were separated from the family, and that would be a whole chapter in itself. But I did pastoral work there. It's great too, but with COVID, I can't continue. And then in 2018, a program that, I don't know, maybe one of you might participate in the future. We had scheduled, last summer, we had scheduled 2 groups from Florida to come down to learn about the border. But then with COVID, that was stopped. And as of now, we have 2 groups scheduled for the summer, right, Vanessa? So hopefully, the Encuentro project basically is we set up a program. We have a house that used to be a convent of sisters, which has capacity for about 20 people. And we pretty much, if the group comes for 5 days, we'll schedule visits and activities during the time you're here to learn about immigration law, to actually do direct work. When the shelters were open, actually the students, it was great. It was kind of the highlight of the trip. They would go to the shelters and process the people coming in and help distribute food, medication, and all sorts of things. So it was great doing that. At times, the groups want to go to Ciudad Juarez, we'll go to Juarez. So hopefully we'll get back to some sort of normality with this COVID thing, and we'll have 2 groups from Fordham come over. So that's called the Encuentro Project. If you even want to see something about it, you just go to encuentroproject.org. Encuentro, ENCUENTRO, project altogether.org. You know, before just one other thing is that everybody, of course, is very concerned about COVID. And, you know, the little I've heard from the news, I know that New York City did a great job in controlling it, but I think there's another outbreak again. Is that correct? Or in New York City? So, I mean, I remember it was all exemplary, how you all got it all under control. And so it's kind of a topic everybody has to, you know, discuss somehow. And what I can tell you about COVID, El Paso is actually in a huge spike right now. We're in a very difficult moment. We're getting like anywhere in the past 5 days or so, we've gotten 700 to 800 new cases a day. We have more active cases right now than Dallas, which is a city much larger than us. But it's not due to the immigrants. I mean, some people would immediately say, well, see, that's because the border, but it's not due to that at all. It's basically from here. Juarez, they do different ways of testing things and all, but they're not like, you know, doing much worse than we are. In some ways, probably even better. Certainly in recent months, they were doing much better. It was very interesting because at one point, this was historically interesting and amusing, but recently, Juarez had restrictions of people crossing from the US to Mexico. And they actually were spraying people, I think, with some sort of a disinfectant going over from the US to Mexico, which is kind of ironic and funny and sad because there's the history of El Paso. If you go back to this, there was a time when migrant farm workers that came from Mexico were actually stripped and sprayed with toxic, very dangerous chemicals. They were like fumigated. And that's part of the history of the El Paso and the discrimination that I was talking about. It was just the way that things were. But now it's really interesting that Juarez was putting restrictions on people from the US from crossing, so over to there. So that was really interesting. But with the MPP program, and I only know bits and pieces of this because of people that I know and we support that work over there with in shelters. What's happening is that people, you know, let's say you're from Central America and you're fleeing the gang violence and also real threats. You can read stuff like this. I'm sure you can find stories and there's all sorts of information on this, but the criminal elements in Central America extort people. They extort them to the degree where they can no longer survive if they have a small business, and they'll kill you. You'll kill you or kill a relative if you don't come through with the money. So it's people often they have to leave on short notice because they're either going to kill someone or also the gangs are recruiting teenagers to either be mules, to carry drugs, to do something for them. And if they don't, if they don't respond, they may get killed. And there's kidnappings and there's all sorts of horrible things. So people have to get up and go and move on. So often they try to relocate within the same country, which makes more sense. But in a small country like El Salvador, if you're being chased by drug lords that are connected with the government, there's no way you're going to hide because, often the government is in connection with the criminal elements. So it's very hard to hide. And people don't, a lot of people from the US, when we've had groups and so on, will think, well, why don't they go to the police? But often the local police, because of, again, here's a structural problem, a structural sin. Often the people that are policemen, they get paid very little, so it's very easy for them to fall under the hands of criminal elements if they're offered money to turn people in or to work with them and to collaborate. So it's kind of a chain reaction of bad things. So people have to get up and go, and then they come to the border. In those situations, often they have relatives in the US who have helped pay for their trip. A coyote I don't know what it is right now, but a few months ago, it was anywhere from $3,000 to $5,000 per person to get you up here to the border and to cross you. Now, I don't know how people do it. I don't know how they come up with the money so quickly. I think relatives in the US send it via Western Union. There's all sorts of things. People find ways to get the money. And then along the way, many things can happen. Some of them get kidnapped. Women get raped. They say that over 60% of the women get raped at least once. So all kinds of things can happen. You can get kidnapped along the way, and then the kidnappers will call your relatives and say, we have your family here, wire us $5,000 and we'll let them go. And so imagine, I mean, those things happen, and they're just, I could go on with all sorts of stories, but then you get to the border here, and like I was saying before, normally you would ask for asylum if you had a credible fear. You had a credible fear interview, and if you showed certain signs that you express fear of returning to your country because of circumstances that you explained, you will be processed, and then people were processed, and since there were that many people, they were processed, and then they were say, okay, well, then you have to go continue your case where your relative is that's going to take care of you, and they put an ankle bracelet on them. They were monitored. And they had to show up to wherever they were going. Let's say to New York City, they had like 4 or 5 days to get there, and then report to the ICE office in New York and say, well, I'm here. And then they had to, I think, stay within 50 miles, I think 50-mile radius of their location until their court case would come up. And if their case took more than 6 months, they get a work permit. And some of the courts are backed up for like 2 years or so. So that was a normal process. People would come, and if they express, this happened to me in my country, they threatened my son, or they kidnapped me, and whatever the case was, they were processed, and then would come for the asylum hearing. Most of the people that we see at the shelters, we really determine, it's very sad, most of those people would probably not qualify for asylum, because to qualify for asylum, you need to have evidence, you need to have reports, you need to have, and most people that were leaving on short notice, they didn't have a police report because they didn't go to the police. They didn't have much of anything to show. So again, it's part of our, in our Catholic belief, I think we often talk about the plight of the poor. I mean, these are the people, the poorest of the poor that are caught in situation where they can't really show or prove their situation. Doesn't mean that there's people that might take advantage of the situation. That happens in any group. But the majority of the cases that we know are people really that were really in need. So those are the people we saw. But now, especially with COVID, first with MPP. With MPP, they started processing you. And then instead of moving you forward to a relative, they said, well, now you have to go to Juarez, and you have to wait in Juarez until your case comes up. And so people were stuck in Ciudad Juarez, like they are now, for months. Many people did not know where to go, so a whole network of shelters and people of goodwill and organizations tried to help, but it was only with a small percentage. I mean, the numbers are huge. Other people decided to move to other parts of Mexico to try to find work. But with MPP, they were sent back to Mexico to wait. And then when their case came up, then they would cross over, and they would either get an asylum hearing, and they would either be then moved to a city in the US, or told you don't have a case, and they were deported back to their home country. With COVID, since COVID, now the US has taken an even more stronger position of saying, with COVID, we're not even interviewing anybody. If you're coming to the border to ask for asylum, well, just have to wait in Juarez. We're not talking to anyone. So it's hard to even know how many people are asking for asylum now, because they're not able to ask for asylum. They just have to wait in Ciudad Juarez And there's all kinds of ministries there, and we're supporting as we as a parish. People that I know they're working in shelters, they're working. There's a program to give food to people that are being returned back to Juarez every day. They're doing it once a week. People being deported from that were Mexican citizens back to Juarez. People have been maybe in the United States for years or decades. They're being deported back to Mexico through Juarez, and once they get there, the first thing they need is food and some orientation of what they can do. So there's many good projects there, but I also hear that there's a problem with COVID in the shelters. Imagine if you have a shelter with 20, 30, 50, 100 people, or sometimes more. If somebody gets sick, then you have to isolate that person, or there's been some shelters that have closed down because they've had COVID and they said, well, we can't, it's spreading and we can't continue the shelter, or we won't take new people. So it's very complicated and very confusing right now to have all of that. So I'm basically now I'm not doing anything with migrants directly, except at the parish where we have a lot of immigrant families from Mexico. Where as pastor, I'm doing work here, but I can't do anything at the detention center, and we have no people crossing the border. So, and we have no groups for the Encuentro project. So I'm back at just doing parish work. I was gonna ask, before I open it up for questions, I wanted to just mention, I believe that Vanessa sent to you a handout that I prepared for the groups that come down for the Encuentro project on Catholic social teaching. And I don't know if you all had a chance to see that, but I just, I think, you're part of a Jesuit university, and I'm a Jesuit, and for me, it's important to at least mention this, because I think Catholic social teaching, I don't know how many of you are even familiar with that term. I hope you are. I don't know if you've had in your own, if you're in a Catholic university, I'm sure you've had Jesuit university. But a lot of people are not familiar with it. A lot of people don't know. A lot of priests don't talk about it very much, sadly enough. And what I like about Catholic social teaching, it sounds kind of, it's got a fancy name, but it's basically the gospel in action. It's basically putting our faith in action. And when you think about it, one of the things that's unique about being a Catholic, a Christian, is that we believe that God became human, which is something that most religions would say that's impossible. We believe in the incarnation, and we believe that, faith has to be incarnated. We have to deal with people's reality, with their problems. They're human beings, they're not angels. You can't have just a religion that's just about talking about spiritual things. If you look at the life of Jesus, that's why it's so exciting to look at Catholic social teaching through the decades and centuries, is that it addresses real important critical issues. The whole let's say the whole group of what we call the body of Catholic social teaching started in 1891 with an encyclical written by Pope Leo XIII, because of the Industrial Revolution and the fact that there was child labor happening, especially I think in England and other places in Europe. So there was an encyclical written by the Pope. We're talking about 1891, so it wasn't as the present times. Already addressing, saying it is unjust to make children work, and explaining the injustice of that. So it's really putting your faith in action, and I think it's very exciting to see that. And because our faith ultimately has to do with with human beings. It's kind of like that. Our faith, we cannot say, there's a joke that says something like, I really love God, but I hate to work with human beings. That doesn't work if you're a Christian, to say, I'm very spiritual, but I don't want to have anything to do with working with people, or I don't want to have anything to do with social things. Well, I mean, we're human beings. We're not just spiritual beings. We're human beings. So, and what's great is if you look, and you can look at the handout if you haven't later, but if you take a look at someone like the prophet Isaiah, and I've got a couple of quotes in the handouts. Isaiah number 1 and Isaiah chapter 58. It's The prophet, as you know, is denouncing what's happening. It's trying to bring the people back to who they say they are, and they say, you know, you've been unfaithful. You say you're so good, so religious, but you're not really doing the right thing. So, if you look at Isaiah chapter 1, verses 11 to 18, or Isaiah 58, 3 to 11, I've got it there for you. You know, it talks about, it actually says, you know, things like, you know, he speaks as if he's speaking for God, like a prophet does. Is, you know, I don't want to hear any more of your prayers. I don't want to hear you. I don't want to be part of your gatherings and all that. If all you're going to do is have all these religious rituals, which is the same thing that Jesus encountered with the Pharisees. He says, but at the same time, he says, you know, wash yourselves, take the blood off your hands, make yourselves clean, remove evil doings, you know, seek justice, rescue the oppressed, defend the orphan, plead for the widow. And this is Isaiah speaking about 600-700 years before Christ. So he's already saying, you know, if you're going to be a person of faith, you got to work for justice. You got to work to see these structural issues, which to me is a big challenge, you know. And I think that's one of the exciting things about Catholic social teaching. And even Isaiah is seeing it. And Jesus saw it when, you know, the religious leaders, the temple, for example, was taking all these taxes and all that for the poor, and the temple was very rich, and there were all these poor people not being cared for. Because, you know, it's easy to, it's not easy, but, you know, we all understand our personal sins, you know, and we need to change things about our own internal attitudes and our own actions and take responsibility. But often we don't talk about how is the system geared. The system has been made to favor certain people and exclude others. And I think that's become very clear lately. And things like, you know, Black Lives Matter is one example, or others to say, look, you know, this is still happening. The system's not working for everybody. One thing is what people talk about, like, you know, yeah, this is great and everything's going great, but it's not really that great for a lot of people. So how do you look at the structural system? And the Catholic social teaching tries to do that, tries to denounce what's going on. The letter of St. James is also a great one. You know, you've probably heard about that, where he talks about, where he says, what good is it, brothers and sisters, if you say that you have faith, but you do not have works? Can faith save you? If your brother and sister is naked and lacks daily food, and one of you says to them, go in peace, keep warm, eat your fill, yet you do not supply their bodily needs, what good is that? So faith by itself, if it has no works, is dead. That's the words of James from the Bible, you know. So he's calling us to action, and it's very powerful letter of St. James, chapter 2 and chapter 5, and he actually addresses, come now, you rich people, weep and wail for the miseries that are coming to you, and you know, he talks about, he's really challenging the people that have a lot and others that don't. There's another great saying that I like. It says, you know, well, there's two sayings that I want to share with you. It says, you know, the first is like, the truth will set you free, but it'll first make you miserable, because you're gonna have to change some things in your life. You know, that's one thing. And then the other one is what's it? What's it? Let me try to remember how it goes. Well, I'll remember in a moment. But it's something about the Gospels. You know, if faith doesn't challenge you to say, you know, am I living according to who I say I am, then that's why you have the prophets and you have Jesus and so on addressing the people. And then under Catholic social teaching, if you look at, well, on page 12 of the handout, there's a book that you can actually download. It's a book, but it's actually a document from Rome called the Compendium of the Social Doctrine of the Church. You can download it as a PDF, and it talks about, it's divided into 10 chapters, and it talks about, you know, issues of economic life, human work, the political community, safeguarding the environment. So you can, if you have certain issues that you want to say, what does the church say about the environment? Now, Pope Francis has added a lot of things now, Laudato Si. But before Pope Francis, this was written in 2004, or it compiles everything in 2004. That's a great document to have, the compendium of the social doctrine of the church. And then there was a document on migration that was published in 2003, and I was here as pastor when this document came out from the Mexican bishops and the U.S. bishops. It's called Strangers No Longer, Together in the Journey of Hope. And it talks about the church's, kind of the principles of Catholic social teachings and migration, you know, that people have a right to find an opportunity in their homeland, which is the first right that's being violated because of the criminal element. And you have a right to stay home, and you should be able to stay in your country, and the government is supposed to protect you, not to be exposing you to dangers. Persons have a right to migrate if they cannot support their families, and then sovereign nations have a right to control their borders, but the more powerful nations and economically rich nations have a greater duty to accept immigrants. So as you can see, it's treating humanity as we are sons and daughters of God. It's not saying, well, you know, we keep you out because, you know, you don't belong here, and all these things that we hear. And refugees and asylum seekers should be afforded protection. And that's exactly what we're not doing by telling people, well, you got to wait in Juarez. You know, we're sending them back to very dangerous situations. So if you look at Strangers No Longer, it's in the handout that I sent to you. And then the last thing I would like to mention is that Pope Francis came up with a document that's called Towards a Global Compact on Migrants and Refugees in 2018. And he talks about 4 things that we should be looking at with migrants and refugees. He talks about we should welcome, increase safe and legal routes for migrants and refugees. We should protect, ensuring migrants and refugees' rights and dignity, promoting, fostering the integral human development of migrants and refugees, and then integrating greater participation of migrants and refugees to enrich local communities. So what Pope Francis is there saying in 4 words: welcome, protect, promote, and integrate. Makes a lot of sense. You know, you can't just say, well, we welcome you, but then you're stuck here with no path to do anything. So he talks about protecting, you know, once they're in a place, that their rights are protected, that they're not discriminated against. Promoting, that they can continue if they're young people. And that's kind of the crisis with DACA right now. As you know, there's a lot of people that have been here for years. They came as children. They never lived in Mexico or anywhere else. And if DACA is undone, they may be deported. Well, under the current administration, they would be deported. So protecting, promoting, let them develop into something, and then participation. You know, the migrants and refugees have a lot to teach us. It's amazing, their faith, their endurance, their faith to go on where most of us would probably give up, their resilience to endure all kinds of hardships along the way. And to me, it's very edifying. When I would go to the shelters, I would leave very humbled and say, wow, these people, it's a religious lesson that I just had here, rather than me helping them. You know, they're helping me. So anyway, so that's kind of like what I like to say. I've talked for about 40 minutes, and so maybe see if you have any questions about what I said earlier on, or about Catholic social teaching, or whatever you want to present. So I'm ready for questions.
You guys can just raise your hand if you guys have any questions, and I'll call on you.
I have one, Father Raphael. Sorry, Ryan, I didn't raise my hand. Thank you so much for all of the comments that you've offered. I think that there's a lot of food for thought there. What are some ways that we might be able to live the mission of the Encuentro Project? I know most of us are in the New York area, but there are some of us who might be joining virtually from other areas of the United States. What are ways that we might be able to live the organization's mission wherever we are to support your work?
Good, thank you. Okay, great question. And one of the things that Ruben Garcia, who's the coordinator of all these shelters I was talking about, whenever he has groups, he tells them, you know, we really don't need you to come here. You can do a lot from where you're at. It's great if you can come, but the first thing you can do is, first of all, November 3rd, by November 3rd, those who can vote, vote. You know, that's what, because one of the things that he says is very true is that the laws are made by representatives and senators from all over the country. So it's not only El Paso, the laws are not made here. So wherever you live, you can vote and you can work for justice from where you're at. The second thing is that maybe you already are doing this in some way, whether it's to the university or you as individuals, try to connect with, are there any groups that work with immigrants, organizations, get to know families that are, hear their stories. Hearing the stories is just fascinating. You'll see that it's people that are just like you. They have hopes and dreams. They have the same situations that your families would have. And just get to know them and try to see if you can do something that work with them or serve them in some way, but just get to know them. One of the things that there's a program that we have an institute out of Loyola University, New Orleans, that's called Jesuit Social Research Institute, JSRI, and you can look it up. It's got all sorts of great information, except it focuses on the South, on the Gulf states, but it deals with issues of migration, racism, and poverty, and they're all three of them are interconnected: poverty, racism, and migration. And they came up with a model which is very simple. We did it here in one of the parishes once. It's basically, if you gather a group, it could be a group of students, it could be in your parish, it could be whoever, and then you invite at least one family that's a migrant family that has had a, let's say, I don't like to use the word interesting, but it has a story to tell that would be eye-opening. And also that they're willing to share, because a lot of people don't want to either they don't want to talk about it again, they don't want to relive it again, or they're afraid because they're undocumented. But you know, if they're there as asylum seeker, they would have documents, so they're not there. They don't have to fear deportation. But to have a group listen to their stories, and then afterwards you either break up in small groups or have questions. And what we did here in El Paso, since most of the people in this parish were Mexican Americans, we actually broke up in small groups, and each group talked about their own family's migration story. You know, like how did their families get here, the suffering that they went through, kind of their own stories, and that was very good. And we had a woman speak. She spoke. She's actually working now here at Sacred Heart Church, but she was about to be deported, and she has a daughter who has cancer. She's had about 11 surgeries, this little girl. The girl's about 12 now, I believe. And she was in the hospital when ICE wanted to deport her. And even the Bishop of El Paso intervened, and several of us went to the ICE office. And the bishop's the one that really was a mover and shaker. And they stopped the deportation, and she's now, situation is regularized. She told her story. And what's even more interesting is the reason she came with her sick daughter and other kids, because they killed her husband. I mean, the criminal elements were after their family. And they gave her a few days. They told her, if you don't leave with your children, we're going to kill you too. So she told her story. Now, when you hear a story like that, then you say, well, how can you tell that person, are you just coming to take my jobs? You know, when you hear stuff like that with politicians, I mean, that woman probably didn't want to come here, you know. She was fine until all of these threats happened. So one thing you can do is invite a migrant to share their story or hear their stories in some context. Then, so vote, get involved in politics. You know, another great thing is to go see the local office of your representative or senator. go as a group. That's what the Ignatian teaching does. And to say, we want to talk to you about our concern for immigrants, but have some real facts and some real, things to tell them. So get involved in the politics, meet families, and just be informed. Be informed. So I think that would probably be. And there's, you don't have to be there's immigrants in needs in New York for sure. So there's maybe some ways to get involved with an organization that helps immigrants. If you're interested in that, by all means, that would be a suggestion. So. Everybody else? Oh, yes, Amalia.
Yes, hi. Thank you for your presentation. I just had a question, like dealing with these issues and like just hearing all these like really painful stories from immigrants. Like, how do you deal with like compassion fatigue from, just hearing about like their stories and like what they've had to endure?
Yeah, that's a very good point, and I think I don't know if I have how to really explain it psychologically, but a lot of it has to do with personality types. They say that there's certain personality types, like, which is my personality type, that it feels more like you're taking this in the gut. It's like this suffering, and you want to try to do something for the people and feel frustrated and so on. There's other personality types that would just start crying and say, this is horrible. There's other people that are just thinkers, and they just try to put it in their mind and say, well, let me see what to do. And, they're not that as affected, but I'm affected. I feel it. But I think this might sound strange, but I think those of us who work in these kinds of things, you have to create a certain distancing. In other words, you can't take on every case like, I've got to resolve this person's situation. You keep a healthy type of separation. I'm sure counselors or psychiatrists, psychologists would tell you something similar. You can't take on now some stories hit you harder than others, especially if you have to deal with a person. I mean, if you get to know the person a lot, which has happened to me with some people here in the parish. But in the shelter with those great volumes of people, they were gone. Like, I'd go one day, and then the next day or the 2 days after, they'd be gone. So it was different, but it is sad. I mean, and I often tell people now, when I wake up in the morning, I think it's a common experience. Many of us feel somewhat depressed, and not only seeing the politics of the United States, what's going on, but the COVID, and then all these things, and saying, well, it's tough. But, prayer is also important, really the spiritual dimension. And one of the things that has helped me a lot, there's a Franciscan priest, I'll mention his name. Some of you might be familiar with it, but his name is Richard Rohr. And he's a great spiritual teacher, and he's been a great influence on my life. But, we talk in his talks, he talks about the cosmic Christ. And, and really it's important for a good spirituality to not only see God in my little life, and even in my little family, or even in my little planet Earth, but to say, this is God of the universe. This is a God of the universe that has existed for 13.7 billion years. Whatever happens now is only a little piece of the history of the story of salvation, of the story of creation. And so, I mean, when you put it into that bigger context, for me, it helps me to say, okay, this is not like, this is not all. This is not the whole thing, and even my life is not the whole thing. So those things help to put it into a bigger, at least it helps me. It might not help other people to say, no matter what happens, this is only 1 year, 1 century of this big history of the story of God and creation. And that helps me somehow. But that doesn't mean that I'm gonna detach from helping the individual person that I have in front of me that needs help, because you have to balance both things out. And really, I'm trying to give you something on good spirituality, where you probably have heard of God as being immanent and transcendent. You need to have those two things. The transcendent is God is the God of the universe. We cannot say we understand God. We get glimpses, but we can't say we understand this whole reality or God's plan. At the same time, God is imminent. He's in my heart and he's close, and I can appeal to God and I know God is there. So you have to, I don't know if I'm helping you with this answer, Amalia, but there's many dimensions, and it has to do with personality types. And I know some people couldn't do this work, just like some people can't be doctors because they see blood and they faint. Other people can be great medical people because they can deal with blood and guts very well. So I don't know. I'm happy. I think you're also called when God gives you the grace to do what you need to do. I believe in that very strongly. So somehow I keep going, and I like what I'm doing. I wouldn't trade it right now for anything else. Let's see. One thing just to follow up on that was, when we had one of the groups in the Encuentro Project, I always remember this, and I quote, we had a student, we had a hard day, we went to Juarez, and we went to the shelter, and worked there. And I remember one student was like lying flat on the couch there. We were having like reflection that evening, and she said something to the effect it's mind-boggling to me to see so much suffering and at the same time so much love and care. And it's something that's part of the mystery of our faith. I think that we're suffering, and Paul talks about that, where there's suffering, grace also can abound. And it's often in crisis situation that the best of us comes out. Think about your own life. I mean, sometimes you're in autopilot, you're just living everything, kind of my daily routine life. Everything's taken for granted. But then something happens in your life that brings it to a halt, or you have some crisis, somebody that dies, you lose your job, some crisis happens, and it makes you think what's important in life. It might bring you closer to some friends. You begin to talk at a level that you weren't talking before. You sort of leave the superficiality of everyday life and go deeper. And that's what I think that student was saying, and it's very true. You go to the shelter and you see people there, people who are immigrants who had just come in and had escaped kidnapping and so on, telling us, how can we help? Can we help you do this? Supporting each other. And you say, wow, this is very different than everyday life. So suffering can also bring you graces and can help you grow very much. Let's see. I see all those hands up. Let's see. Anybody else?
Sorry, I'm on my phone. I have one, but I can't find the hand raising tool. But
That's okay.
I was gonna ask, just given like the current administration and I guess the vocalization of like just anti-immigrant sentiments, how do you kind of deal with people that kind of use their faith to back politics that minimizes certain people's existence?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. It's very, we talk about the second commandment, which I never had understood very well. Like the second commandment says, do not take the Lord's name in vain. And most people think that means using a bad word with God's name in it. And I've come to reflect that a lot more, that means when people say, well, God says you should do this, or Christianity says that I can reject the immigrant, or whatever it might be, that's taking, I would say, God's name. We have to be very careful. And we're seeing a lot of fundamentalist religion. It's happening with, of course, Islam. We've heard about that a lot in the news, fundamentalist Islam. There's fundamentalist Judaism, too, like, you know, the settlers in Israel that on the name of religion, they're mistreating the Palestinians and kicking people out, burning houses, getting, you know, so there's that. And then there's fundamentalist Christianity, where somehow, you know, accumulating riches and discriminating against people. You know, it's a very complicated, but I think it's an exciting thing to look at because it's what we're living today. You know, one of my conclusions, I'll just share my own insights into. I think a lot of people put nationalism or their national identity above the gospel. That's one way to see it. I mean, a lot of people would say, well, this is what the law says, you know, and the law says we can't accept these people, so let them, you know, let them suffer. That's not our problem. So I think when nationalism or laws take over beyond the real meaning of Christianity, you have problematic religion. And as the same Richard Rohr would say, says religion can be the best thing or religion can be the worst thing. And think about how many wars, how many things have happened in the world in the name of religion. Just look at history. I mean, and it's happened in Europe, it's happened everywhere. So misusing the name of God, the second commandment, has brought a lot of problems to our world. And I think, you know, with people like that, like what you're saying, asking Michelle, sometimes one thing that I would recommend is don't have a confrontational argument. It won't work. It's very tempting to think, well, I'm going to pull this answer on them and it's going to disarm them totally and they're going to, you know, say, I'm sorry, you're right, and I'm wrong. It's not going to happen that way. So, you know, a kind of direct confrontation is not the best way to do it. It just, sometimes you just have to listen and say, well, you know, this has been my experience, it's what I know, and just sort of handle the question. You know, it's very interesting, but Jesus, it's been studied, Jesus in the gospel never really answers a question, very few questions directly. So, you know, if somebody says, you know, are you going to let these criminal immigrants come in? Well, then you just, you don't have to say yes or no. You just say, maybe answer with another question. Well, they're probably not all criminals. There's a lot of good people that I've met. You know, you sort of have to turn the question around and focus it differently. But it's complicated. People have their worldviews, and so it's complicated. But it's always also good to try to hear what are they trying to defend. And it's very hard to do that. I mean, I get angry too with people, and sometimes I prefer not talk to them. But so try to hear, what are they fearing? What are they trying to defend? And an anti-immigrant person is talking about, you know, and that's being racist or what happened. What are they trying to say? Well, maybe they have this idealistic idea, you know, this idealism of what a peaceful nation could look like, but of course it's got its problems of their worldview. But you're trying to say, well, what are they really trying to say? Because often there's always a little angle to what they're saying, that there's some positive thing or some truth to it. So I like to also think, and I hope I can work that way, that nobody's ever 100% right, and it's never 0 to 100. It's usually, you know, 80 to 20 or, you know, 95 to 5, but don't ever write someone off as totally wrong. You know, I think that's just a good place to start, to say, you know, what is this person trying to say? What is this person really trying to protect? And I mean, they could be wrong on how they're going about it, but still try to save something and say, well, what's this person really concerned about? And, you know, and try not to be, you know, respond with the same anger or violence or, you know, violent talk or whatever. So it's a complicated question, but fundamentalist religion is really doing a great service. This idea of Christianity as you know, that it's exclusive rather than inclusive, and it's got not the right values that Jesus taught, is a real problem. So that's how I would answer that.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, okay. Thank you. Okay. Well, I noticed that Gabriel, you're the only, no, I'm sorry, well, Ryan's a moderator, but Gabriel, you're the only male student in the group, I think. So, how are you doing?
I'm doing good. How are you doing?
Good, good, okay. Where are you from originally, or your family?
I'm actually from El Paso.
Are you? Oh man,
Yeah.
look at that. So you should have said that up front. Okay, what part?
I'm like from the west side. Like I grew up in Canutillo.
Canutillo, okay.
Yeah.
Until you mentioned that, I'm glad I called on you, because Canutillo, that's where one of the places that I go for unaccompanied minors. Southwest Key is there in Canutillo on the main road. What's the name of the road? It's a continuation of the Trans Mountain Road.
Dunfin?
No, the continuation of Trans Mountain Road, east-west. Well, anyway, right there in Canutillo, it's where, that's where Southwest Key is, where they usually they would have up to 100 miners there, 80, 70, and it's there in Canutillo. Yeah, very, very significant place. So, well, good to have you. Have you been back recently?
Yeah, I was there over the summer, but I'm like now in the city. I'm in New York right now, but I'm gonna go back to El Paso over winter break, so it'll be fun.
Ah, okay. Well, give us a call. Good to hear. Anybody else from this part of the world? Anybody else from the Southwest? Or no? Oh.
I'm in San Antonio.
Oh, San Antonio. Okay, good. Well, this is great. This is great. Small world. Okay. So, all right. Any other questions? Or? Oh, by the way, Gabriel, I just remember the name. It's called Talbot Road. Talbot? Does that ring a bell?
Yeah, I know where Talbot is.
Yeah, that's where Southwest Key is at.
Perfect. Well, on behalf of everybody on the call and the Center for Community Engaged Learning, we'd like to thank you for your time with us, Father Rafael. I sent out the PDF that Father Rafael mentioned to those of you who had RSVP'd. I will send it out to all of you tomorrow for your reference. There were a lot of great resources referenced, so definitely check them out. A lot of the work that Global Outreach and the Center for Community Engaged Learning does derives from those original documents that Father Rafael was referencing, Rerum Novarum, all the way through to the more recent Pope Francis document. So if you are ever interested in perusing social justice kind of through its core from the direct sources, those are where you go. So, and if you're ever up for any of those conversations, I am always around and happy to dig into any papal encyclical. So you know how to reach me. But in the meantime, thank you so much, Father Rafael. And yeah, I
really enjoyed it. If you do another one, let me know.
Oh, absolutely, for sure.
This size group is great, because I mean, sometimes you speak. We had a conference with another group, and it was like 100 people.
Oh yeah,
large, but this is great. I can see you, and I really enjoyed it. Thank you very much.
For sure. Take care, everyone. Have a good night.
Okay. God bless. Bye bye.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.